Seeing Hurricane Sandy bearing down on the East Coast, what did you think? And what did you think about if something like that were to happen in the Bay Area?
Well, frankly, it was terrifying. I mean, to watch what was happening in New York was really terrifying. And for many of us who are here on the West Coast who have family and friends back east, hearing some of the stories about the lines that people had to wait in to get gas, the power outages, people who were trapped in their cars where there was very severe flooding on the streets, it was really terrifying. So that was, I mean, that was my reaction, I think, similar to a lot of San Franciscans. And of course, being somebody who works for local government, I also thought, what do we need to do here in the Bay Area to ward off the worst effects of climate change? We don't want to see a Sandy in the Bay Area, but who knows if we will.
Well, that's the question. Some people think that the East Coast, they get hurricanes, that can't happen. That's over there. It can't happen here. Any of that thought that like, well, that's New York. We don't have hurricanes, so won't be as bad here.
So I think that there was some of that, but we also did have some severe weather events last year. The Pineapple Express that came to the Bay Area, where we saw some rising tides and rising sea levels in the Bay, where along our Embarcadero and along our port, you could see the impacts of a severe weather event in the Bay Area. So for anybody who was a naysayer, I think once we saw that, it really brought it home last year.
Zack Wasserman, I'd like to ask you the same thing. You saw Sandy, you're chair of a commission that's responsible for governing sort of the water's edge around the Bay Area. Did you think, uh-oh, what did you think when you saw Sandy?
Well, I was certainly frightened, as was everybody else, and very concerned. But I will also say there was an element of me, both not so much immediately, but in the aftermath, that was hopeful, because Sandy is a wake-up call. And the problem with adapting to the rising sea level is it occurs over such a long period of time. It's not really here now for people. Sandy, to some extent, brought it home. I would certainly not wish that on New York or New Jersey or here, but I think there are some benefits that we can gain from it.
So we'll get into that in sort of Sandy as a lesson and as a wake-up call. As a report, you focused a lot on seismic risk, and that's often been the biggest risk in the Bay Area, and climate has come up recently. So tell us about when you started to realize that climate risk was something that you would deal with in your career, not something that your successors or future generations would have to deal with.
Well, we're preparing a sustainable community strategy that will be adopted this year. That's supposed to be looking out to 2040. And when we started to get more into the issues of vulnerable areas and vulnerable populations, it became apparent to us that we're going to have to make some significant infrastructure planning before we proceed with that plan. We're going to be adopting a plan knowing that there's a lot of work left to be done, but at least we'll set a schedule forth when we'll hold ourselves accountable for getting the work done.
Well, let's talk about those vulnerabilities. As we look around the Bay Area, what are the biggest risks? What communities, what areas are most at risk?
The areas that are most at risk are the ones, obviously, that have the lowest elevation, and also the major infrastructure that the Bay Area could see damaged, which would affect everybody. There also is a tremendous seismic risk, which is a potential immediate concern, and affects how sea level rise is dealt with, because the liquefaction within the areas of levees and things of that hard engineering protection would have to be taken into account. So our view is that the assessment, the risk assessment that's necessary for the Bay Area is the first order of business. And we have not done a good one to date.
So we don't know. I mean, if you're near the water and flat land, you're probably ought to be thinking about this, but it sounds like no comprehensive risk assessment has been done. Is that, hear that correctly? Zack Wasserman?
I think that's correct, although we're making small progress towards that. One of the BCDC projects is adapting to rising tides, the ART project, and it has studied the area along the Alameda County coastline for the Bay, from Albany down to Hayward, and there is a vulnerability assessment. It's on our website. So we've started that. We think it's going to be that kind of approach is going to be used in other parts of the Bay. But the next big step is one that really hasn't been taken, although certainly we've given it thought, and that is, what can we do to protect our built environment in the most vulnerable areas and our most vulnerable communities?
Melanie Nutter?
Well, the California Energy Commission did recently do a study on the Bay Area, and some of what they projected was that we could see sea level rise up to 15 inches by 2050 and up to 55 inches by the end of the century. There also were projections saying that we could see increases in temperature in the Bay Area anywhere from 3 to 11 degrees. But as we heard in the last panel, that science is constantly changing, and some of the science that's coming out is potentially conservative. So what Ezra said, I think, is exactly true. We as a city don't yet have an agreed upon risk scenario that we have said, this is the risk scenario that we are accepting of a baseline and where we will start from. So there's certainly many projections out there, none of them very positive, and it could be that they're more conservative than what we'll be seeing.